The first thing that I remember noting would be we have a young black female, adult female. She is clothed. She had clothing on. The clothing was wet and also appeared to be soaked.
In the early hours of January 30th, 2008, a woman was found dead on Interstate 540 near a highway in Wake County, North Carolina. At around 6 a.m., the police received several emergency calls from passersby reporting seeing something strange on the highway. When they got to the scene, they found the body of a woman. Upon closer inspection, she had suffered multiple sharp object wounds and was left discarded near the highway. Not only had the body been stabbed almost beyond recognition, but her pants were unzipped, and sex protection was found inside of her. As investigators dug deeper, what they found was the most unbelievable thing ever. This is the very tragic story of Latrice Matrall Curtis. For you to better understand the people in this story, let me share with you their backgrounds from Wake County, North Carolina. A 21-year-old Latrice Matrall Jones Curtis was born on May 28, 1986, to parents Sherman and Cynthia Jones in Raleigh, North Carolina. She grew up in a close-knit family alongside her 4 siblings and was affectionately known as Treese by her loved ones. Latrice was outgoing and well-loved, earning popularity throughout her high school years. Latrice was also a bit of a tomboy. Her siblings teasingly nicknamed her Daddy's Little Boy in a Dress because of her close bond with her father Sherman. They would go fishing, hunting, and learning basketball. Wherever Sherman went, Latrice was right by his side, following him like his shadow. On top of that, Latrice knew she could tell her dad anything, no matter how tough or intimidating the situation, and he was always there to support her every step. When it came time to choose a college, Latrice prioritized staying close to her loved ones. She was accepted into Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina, where she decided to pursue a degree in accounting. She also worked part-time at Sears, but one choice would change her life forever. During her freshman year, she crossed paths with a charming young man named Darren Lee Curtis. The two immediately developed an instant liking for each other and began dating. Darren had served in Iraq in 2004 as part of the Army National Guard and was also pursuing the same major as Latrice. She loved being with Darren, but Latrice was hiding a secret from her family. For whatever reason, Latrice refused to tell anyone, not even her family, about Darren. It was as if she was deliberately keeping the relationship a secret. This behavior seemed unusual, especially since Latrice was known for sharing everything with her family. It just didn't feel right. Perhaps she wanted to make sure that what she had with Darren wasn't just a fling. But as time went on, her silence raised more questions. Latrice kept her relationship with Darren a secret for an entire year. Not only did Latrice not tell her family about him, but even her co-workers knew nothing about Darren. However, what happened next caught everyone off guard, especially Latrice's family. On April 27, 2007, Latrice and Darren took a bold step to elope and get married in secret without informing anyone. It wasn't until later, when Latrice showed up at her job at Sears with a giant ring on her finger, that she revealed the big news. She announced that she had gotten married, and naturally, her co-workers assumed she was joking. It took some time before Latrice could convince them that she had indeed been in a relationship all along and now had a husband. Latrice eventually introduced Darren to her co-workers, and he came across as polite, respectful, and fairly easygoing. There didn't appear to be anything unusual about him. Afterward, Latrice decided it was time to tell her family about her secret marriage. She invited her parents and siblings to meet Darren, but what happened next would set off a chain of events that no one could have foreseen. The meeting didn't go as Latrice had hoped. Her family, particularly her father Sherman, was hurt and confused, struggling to understand why she had kept such a big secret from them. Latrice, seeing their concern, tried to reassure everyone. She explained that her secret marriage didn't reflect any issues in their relationship. She reassured them that she still loved and trusted her family deeply, and that her relationship with Darren was strong, happy, and fulfilling. After the meeting, Sherman mostly kept his distance from his daughter and her new husband. A few months later, Latrice and Darren decided to transfer to North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina, where they both wanted to finish their degrees. By early 2008, Latrice's relationship with her parents was still strained. However, she was focused on the bright side. She only had one semester left to complete her degree and move on to the next stage of her life. Darren, on the other hand, had already graduated. That was her mindset until January 29, 2008. What began as a seemingly routine day was about to take a dramatic and unexpected turn. Latrice attended her classes as usual, while Darren went about his daily activities. Latrice called Darren at 10 p.m. to let him know she was on her way home after grabbing something to eat. Expecting her back in about 30 minutes to an hour, Darren got ready for bed without waiting up for her. But as the hours passed, Latrice still hadn't returned, and by the middle of the night, she hadn't called to explain the delay. The following morning, Latrice still hadn't returned home. By this point, Darren was starting to fear that something might have happened to her. He worried she could have been in a terrible car accident or that her car might have been broken down somewhere. At 8:30 a.m., he called 911 and filed a missing persons report. The thought of Latrice being stranded all night, waiting for help, was unbearable.
Girl 911, where's your emergency?
I live in Raleigh, but my wife goes to school out at North Carolina Central, and she did not come home last night. I talked to her last night. She was on her way home. She was in the car and everything. She hadn't showed up.
The last known place she was at NCCU. Did you talk to her while she was driving?
Yes, she had the radio on and everything. She told me she was stopping to get something to eat. I don't know if she was still in Durham when she called me or she was on 540 coming back in around.
Tragically, it turned out that people had noticed her, but in the worst way possible. During the night, several people had called the police to report a disturbing sight while driving along Interstate 540.
I was traveling to a meeting going along 540, and as I was driving, I noticed something on the shoulder of the road.
He saw what appeared to be a dead body on the side of the road. The first 911 call came in around 6 a.m., with another caller soon after describing something lying on the highway. Responding to these reports, police rushed to the area described by the callers. But what investigators discovered next would change everything. On getting there, police discovered one of the most tragic scenes ever: the lifeless body of a female. Upon closer look, it was the body of 21-year-old Latrice Curtis. During the investigation, an autopsy revealed that Latrice had been stabbed around 40 times in the head, neck, chest, and stomach. Her pants were unzipped and unbuttoned, and a condom was found inside her, though no evidence of assault was found. Despite her body being found on the side of the road, it was clear she hadn't died in an accident. Police theorized that Latrice might have been involved in a consensual affair that turned violent. Her car was nearby, with blood inside, some matching her DNA, but other blood belonged to an unknown person. When tested, it didn't match any database records.
The victim's fingernails were examined, and it was pretty clear that there was some injury or damage to her nails. There was a DNA sample left on Latrice's car, on the steering wheel. The question really is, who would want to hurt her, and who would want to kill her so violently and so brutally?
They also found Latrice's damaged cell phone a few hundred feet away, which had been left out in the rain overnight. Detectives hadn't identified Latrice when they found her body around 5 a.m., a few hours before Darren reported her missing. Since her phone was damaged, they had no way of knowing who she was. When Darren called 911, his description of Latrice and the key detail that she was driving down I-540 led police to realize the woman was his wife. Naturally, the police had questions for Darren, especially about why he had waited so long to report her missing. They suspected he might have been involved in the murder and delayed calling it in to buy time. And just as they had predicted, Darren was keeping a pretty major secret. That morning, like any other, Latrice's parents turned on the news. The first thing her father, Sherman, saw was a headline about a body found on the freeway.
Breaking news. Body found on I-540. Had a tarp over it. Nothing clicked.
Though the victim's name wasn't mentioned, Sherman had a sudden urge to check on Latrice. He called her, but it went straight to voicemail. Growing uneasy, he tried calling Darren, but that also went unanswered. Determined to ease his worry, Sherman decided to call Latrice's school. At this point, the police hadn't publicly identified the body as Latrice, but rumors had begun to circulate. When Sherman called, the university staff were in an uncomfortable position. They didn't want to be the ones to break the news. Instead, they told Sherman he needed to contact the police. Sherman and his wife Cynthia rushed to the police station, anxiously hoping for a mistake. But as soon as they sat down with a detective, they were devastated to learn not only that Latrice had died, but she had been murdered. The news shattered them. They could have learned earlier, but when they spoke with the detectives, it was after Darren had already known the truth and stayed silent. After calling 911, Darren had been asked to identify Latrice's body, which he confirmed, but he kept it to himself. When Sherman called him, Darren rejected the call, leaving Sherman and Cynthia to painfully discover the truth on their own. The detectives also pointed out how long it took Darren to file the missing persons report, which only fueled their suspicions. From the start of his relationship with Latrice to its tragic end, everything about Darren raised red flags. Darren cooperated fully with the investigation. He allowed the police to take his fingerprints and a DNA sample to compare with the blood found in Latrice's car. He also willingly went in for questioning, during which he explained why he hadn't reported Latrice missing earlier. According to Darren, he had fallen asleep shortly after their conversation around 10 p.m. and didn't realize she hadn't come home until his alarm went off the next morning, and he noticed she wasn't in bed. Despite the questioning, police found nothing concrete to accuse him of being the killer. They searched Darren's car and the apartment he shared with Latrice for evidence, but found nothing suspicious. Detectives also spoke with Latrice's friends, but no one could think of any enemies or anyone who might want to harm her. Latrice was well liked and got along with nearly everyone. The case seemed to be hitting dead ends. That was until a witness came forward with a story that stunned everyone. The story came from State Highway Patrolman Isaac Cooper. He told investigators that the night Latrice died, he had been patrolling I-540, where her body was eventually found. But when he drove by at around 1:30 a.m., Latrice's body wasn't there yet. Instead, he saw two cars pulled over on the side of the highway. One was a white Nissan Sentra, and the other was a white cargo van. So, Isaac stopped to see what was going on. He figured that maybe one of the drivers had broken down and they needed help. Except, when Isaac walked over to the cargo van and to the Sentra, he found both of the vehicles completely empty. Both vehicles had their keys in the ignition and the windows rolled down part of the way, which was weird because it was raining. Since he couldn't make anything of it, he just wrote down both license plates, planning to do some digging when he could and figure out what was going on. But then, he got sent out on a high-priority call, and then he forgot all about it. Then, when Latrice's death made the news, he immediately recognized the Sentra as the same car he had seen that night. However, the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Detectives quickly traced the license plates provided by Isaac Cooper. The Nissan Sentra was confirmed to be Latrice's car. The white cargo van, however, belonged to someone unexpected, 43-year-old Robert Lee Adams Reeves. This name had not surfaced at any point in their investigation. Robert wasn't among Latrice's friends or coworkers, leaving detectives puzzled. Digging deeper, they discovered that Robert Reeves was a pastor who had been preaching at Pleasant Hill Baptist Church for nearly 20 years. However, Latrice wasn't a member of his congregation, and no immediate connection between the two could be found. That was until detectives uncovered Robert's dark history. Despite his role as a pastor, Robert had a troubling criminal record. In 1982, he was charged with simple assault and battery. Later, accusations of inappropriate sexual behavior with a young boy in his parish led to a police investigation. Robert was ultimately convicted of third-degree criminal sexual conduct. After serving his sentence, Robert resumed preaching. He relocated to New York, where nobody knew his past. Those who met him during this time described him as charismatic and trustworthy. That was until 2002, when new allegations would come to light. This time, Robert faced charges of first-degree criminal sexual conduct. Additionally, he was involved in crimes including financial card theft, larceny, possession of a stolen vehicle, and solicitation to obtain stolen property under false pretenses. Despite his extensive criminal history, nothing in Robert's background initially explained why he might have wanted to harm Latrice. However, given his record, police considered him a suspect and brought him in for questioning. But what detectives quickly noticed next shocked everyone in the room. Detectives quickly noticed he had multiple cuts and scratches on his hands and legs, which all appeared recent. One cut on his right hand was deep, which he was asked about it. Robert explained that he had been moving a desk at his house with rough spots and splinters, which caused the injuries. He mentioned that his roommate, Stephen, had helped with the furniture in case they needed to collaborate on his story. Throughout the interrogation, Robert offered easy explanations for everything. He remained calm, cool, and collected, even when his picture was taken and his DNA collected, and his alibi seemed solid. He claimed to have been at church for an evening service the night of Latrice's murder, leaving his house around 8 p.m. After finishing the service at 10, he wrapped up and drove home, arriving around 11 or 11:30 p.m. He wasn't sure about the exact time, but his two roommates could verify his whereabouts. However, as the questioning continued, what they found would not only shock them, but also change how this story would end. Robert claimed that he didn't know Latrice very well, but had seen her around occasionally because she was having an affair with his roommate, Stephen Randolph. Stephen, who played basketball at NCCU, the same college Latrice attended, likely met her on campus. Robert explained that he had allowed Stephen to live with him as a favor. When they first met, Stephen didn't have a job or a place to stay, so Robert offered him a basement room for $300 a month. After Stephen moved in, Latrice began coming around to visit him. Robert also stated that Latrice was at their house just before the murder. When he left for church around 8 p.m., Latrice's car was parked outside. Robert added that he knew Stephen and Latrice were having an affair that night. As for how Robert's van ended up on the freeway, he insisted he never stopped there, but speculated that Stephen might have had a key. Robert explained that Stephen had recently had his tires slashed, so Robert allowed him to borrow the van whenever needed without asking for permission. But Robert made more alarming comments about Stephen. Robert stated that Stephen had been stockpiling weapons, including knives and swords. He recalled finding a gun under Stephen's pillow one day. Robert further shared that Stephen might have killed Latrice because just hours before her death, Latrice had told him she wanted a more serious relationship, something Stephen might not have been ready for. Police decided to call Stephen for questioning. However, Stephen had a more terrifying version of what happened. While Stephen agreed with Robert on the basic facts, he provided a much darker perspective on their relationship. Stephen explained that Robert had acted like a fatherly figure when he took him in, helping him during a time of need. However, Stephen revealed that Robert had made unwanted sexual advances toward him after he moved in. Initially, Stephen thought Robert was joking when he offered to let him live rent-free in exchange for sexual favors. But when he realized that Robert was serious, Stephen became furious and stormed out of the house. About 10 minutes later, he returned and firmly told Robert that nothing like that would ever happen between them. Robert apologized, and Stephen hoped that would be the end of it. But that wasn't the case. Robert kept on asking Stephen, and it got to a point where Stephen didn't feel safe or comfortable in his own place. So, he borrowed his cousin's gun, and he kept it in his room. He hoped he would never have to use it, but he felt better knowing that it was there, in case he ever needed it. Little did he know what was about to happen next. After a few days of these exchanges, Stephen began experiencing weird situations. In October 2007, he was dating a woman named Velma Newton, who would often visit him. However, after Stephen's encounter with Robert, whenever Velma came around, she started receiving disturbing phone calls from an unknown number. While the calls weren't directly threatening to Velma, the caller warned her that he would break both of Stephen's legs, so he couldn't play basketball anymore. The caller then told Velma that the only way to save her boyfriend was to tell him to stop doing whatever he is doing. The caller also reached out to Stephen saying he hoped Stephen had a gun. This felt particularly strange and unsettling to Stephen, as it happened just after he had received a gun from his cousin. Alarmed by the conversation, Stephen went home to check on the gun, only to discover something creepy. The gun was missing. When Stephen confronted Robert, he admitted to taking the gun. Just a few weeks later, Stephen got a flat tire. Initially, he didn't connect it to the threatening calls. He simply fixed it and went about his day. But later that day, when he arrived at Velma's place, the calls began pouring in again, making it feel as though someone was tracking his every move. As if that wasn't enough, when Stephen tried to leave Velma's house that night, he discovered all 4 of his tires had been slashed. Fearing for his safety, Stephen decided to stay at Velma's, unable to feel secure at home with Robert, especially knowing that Robert still had his gun. Throughout the night, Robert relentlessly called, pleading for Stephen to come back. But when Stephen refused, all hell broke loose. Robert began acting as if he was in danger, telling Stephen that someone was knocking on the front door and ringing the doorbell repeatedly, trying to lure Stephen back to the house. But it didn't work. Despite Robert's behavior getting worse, Stephen refused to let it affect his romantic life, so he started dating someone new, Latrice. This part of Robert's confession to investigators was true. Latrice was cheating on her husband Darren with Stephen. While Stephen knew Latrice was married, it didn't seem to bother him much. He was also seeing Velma on the side too. Stephen had no idea he was moments away from the unexpected. As expected, Stephen's new relationship with Latrice enraged Robert. He saw her as an obstacle who was standing in his way of being with Stephen. So, he made a single decision that would change everything. On January 29, 2008, the night Latrice was murdered, she was at Stephen's place, matching what Robert had claimed earlier when he saw Latrice's car parked outside at 8 p.m. Robert stated that he returned home from church around 11 or 11:30 p.m. and stayed in for the rest of the night, insisting he couldn't have committed the murder. But Robert and Stephen had a third roommate, and she had a disturbing version of what happened. She claims she fell asleep between midnight and 1 a.m. and did not hear Robert come in before then. However, she confirmed that Latrice and Stephen were together earlier in the evening. They had been intimate, and according to Stephen, the sex protector had come off during sex and got stuck inside Latrice. This upset Stephen, leading to a back and forth argument that caused Latrice to leave before she could clean up. Stephen then decided to call a friend, and the two of them went to Velma's house around 10 p.m., which coincided with the time Latrice called Darren, lying about leaving campus and heading home. While Stephen was at Velma's, Latrice called him, presumably while driving. She said she was tired of sneaking around and cheating. She wanted a real relationship with him. Stephen, aware that Latrice was married and that he was still seeing Velma, told her they should talk about it in person. According to Stephen, that was the last time he spoke to Latrice, unless that wasn't the last time she had called him. A few moments later, Stephen received another phone call from Latrice, but when he answered, he didn't hear anyone, just silence. He figured that maybe it was an accidental dial, so he hung up, and he didn't think anything of it. However, he wasn't the only one who received such a suspicious call like that from Latrice. At around 2 a.m., Latrice's phone dialed her best friend, Kimberly Parker. Concerned by the late-hour call, Kimberly assumed something was wrong. However, just like Stephen, when she answered, no one spoke. Instead, she heard the sound of wind, traffic, and faint footsteps, as if the call had been made from the side of the road.
I was in my bed and my phone was ringing. Latrice usually doesn't call late at night. That was kind of strange to me. So I picked up the phone. I heard a lot of movement. I heard cars driving by. It sounded like it was close to the highway. Something inside me just told me to just remain on the phone. I was saying, Latrice, 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 until I hung up the phone.
When the call abruptly ended, Kimberly tried calling Latrice back, but the call went straight to voicemail. Meanwhile, Stephen, who had been at Velma's house, left around 1:30 a.m. When he arrived home, he noticed Robert's van was missing from the driveway. This was odd given the late hour. However, Stephen shrugged it off, assuming it wasn't his business, and went inside. What happened next would reveal more than anyone anticipated. Investigators leaned toward believing Stephen's account because the house had a high-tech security system that required individual access codes. Stephen's code was unique and separate from both Robert's and the other roommates. Records showed that Robert used the master code to disarm the system at 2:30 a.m. on the night of Latrice's murder, a code only he knew. indicating he had left the house when Latrice was killed. While Robert accused Stephen of being guilty, Stephen painted Robert as a frightening and potentially violent man with ample opportunity to harm Latrice. The evidence, however, increasingly pointed toward Robert. Still, the police couldn't completely rule either man out, not until they had the DNA results. While the family mourned, authorities were closing in on the truth. When the DNA results came back, they matched closely with the blood that was found in Latrice's car. The result was so close that the experts said that there was a 1 in 140,000 chance of anyone else in the state fitting that profile. The police theorized that Robert, who was possessive and angered by Stephen's relationships with other women, had followed Latrice after she left their house. Latrice, still in discomfort from the sex protector that had gotten stuck inside of her, likely pulled over on the side of the road to remove it. This explained why her pants were unzipped. It was then that Robert approached her. He didn't need to force her out of the car. She had stopped on her own. Once outside, Robert attacked. Latrice fought back, managing to make those 2 phone calls to Stephen and Kimberly, though she was unable to speak. In the end, Robert killed her and then discarded her phone out the window, likely to cover his tracks. Robert may have stopped by the church to clean up so his roommates wouldn't see him covered in blood when he returned home. However, he couldn't get rid of all of the evidence, as the police found horrific evidence hidden in Robert's house. On the morning of February 2nd, when detectives searched Robert's house, they made a gruesome discovery. They found one of his outfits stained with blood hidden in a trash can, and with that, the pieces finally fit together. This was enough evidence for the police to arrest Robert. The police informed Latrice's family that they had the killer in custody. However, her parents were baffled when they learned the suspect was a man named Pastor Robert, someone they had never heard of. It didn't make sense to them until the police explained everything. Within days, investigators also confirmed that Robert was also the unknown caller who had harassed Velma and Stephen on the phone. In addition to his landline and primary cell phone, Robert owned a third device, which he called his fun phone. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Robert, including the DNA result, eyewitness accounts, and phone records, many of his friends and coworkers refused to believe he was capable of murder. A local minister who had worked with Robert for over 3 years publicly defended him, stating, "Robert is an awesome man of God. He knows the Bible and knows people. A very classy gentleman. It's not his character. It's just not him. I really think he was set up." Robert's cousin also vouched for him, describing him as energetic and a go-getter. However, those statements would only end up being thrown in the bin. When Robert's trial began on September 29, 2009, numerous witnesses came forward and testified against him, including Stephen, Velma, and the state highway patrolman who had initially provided the tip about the white van. During the trial, a medical examiner testified about the brutal extent of Latrice's injuries.
It was your examination of Miss Curtis. What did you first note? Your just visual examination as a
The first thing that I remember noting would be we have a young black female, adult female. She is clothed. She had clothing on. The clothing was wet and also appeared to be blood-soaked.
Wet other than being from blood?
Correct. Wet with moisture from water.
Okay. And are you aware of whether or not her height and weight was recorded?
We record the height and weight during the autopsy, yes.
Okay. And what did you record that as?
The decedent's weight was 145 pounds. The decedent's length was 64.5 inches.
So that's 5'4.5".
That is correct.
Not only was she stabbed multiple times, but she also suffered extreme blunt force trauma. Additionally, her body showed numerous defensive wounds, which shows that she had fought desperately to fight off her attacker. The defense argued that Robert could not have committed such a physically demanding attack due to a disability. They claimed that Robert had been mugged and stabbed in the arm while living in New York, leaving him with limited mobility. His sister testified that he could barely use his left hand. let alone overpower someone or stab them. The testimony continued for 7 days, but on October 7, 2009, the jury reached a verdict. They found 43-year-old Robert Lee Adams Reeves guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Latrice's family was more than happy to see Robert go away forever because they couldn't get over how senseless her death was. As far as anyone could tell, Latrice wasn't even aware of Robert's obsession with Stephen. She likely never understood why her boyfriend's roommate attacked her so violently that night. A heartfelt vigil was held in memory of Latrice Matrall Curtis, uniting the community in a powerful show of love and support for her grieving family. Shortly after her tragic death, friends, family, and neighbors gathered to celebrate her life and honor the vibrant spirit she shared with those around her. On Monday, February 4, 2008, a solemn yet beautiful farewell was given to Latrice. Her funeral took place at God's City of Refuge in Newport, North Carolina, with Apostle Willie Murray officiating the service. The ceremony was a reminder of the lives she touched and the legacy of warmth and kindness she left behind. The heartbreaking case of Latrice Curtis serves as a sobering reminder of how little we sometimes know about the dangers lurking in the lives of those we love. How can we better spot the red flags of obsession or violence, even when they're masked by seemingly normal relationships? Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Here are some other shocking stories we've covered on this channel, and they're even more disturbing than what you just watched. I hope you learned something from them. If you like the way we present these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more content. See you in the next one.